Hey guys, so today let's create these beautiful charging animations on the battery. So as you can see in my HTML file, so all I have is a link to the CSS file, and then we have one div that has a class of battery that holds that is the actual battery. So this is the battery I'm talking about. So to get started, I'm going to link my other HTML, my other CSS, so that we can see how we can go about this. So the CSS I want to link is called style2.css. So I'm just going to link that up. And then as soon as I link that up, you can see now the battery is gone, because what we have here is the basic CSS stylings. So the first one we do have is the box sizing for every element. I've talked about this property a lot of times, which is mostly used to make sure that the widths that you give the elements are inclusive of the paddings and the margins. So the next one is we have the stylings for the body. So this one adds the background color you can see right now. We make sure the padding is 0 and the margin is 0, but we give a margin top for the battery. I'll show you when the battery shows up. And then next we give it a height of 100 viewport height. So that's why you can see it occupies the whole screen. And then the other thing we do here is we add a display flex and a justify content center, so that we can place this battery inside in the middle. So inside justify content places it in the middle of the page. So this is so this one is horizontal in the x-axis. We place it in the center. And then that's why we use the display flex. So what we are going to do is that we are going to start styling the battery. So you can see the battery has the class of batteries. So you can come here and say dot battery. And then the first thing we give it is a width. We need to give it some width so that we can start creating it. And then you give it a height of something like 160 pixels. So this one is some arbitrary values. You can adjust them to make sure it matches the battery size you want. And then the best part here is where we add the background color. Then as you can see now, the battery pops up, and then you can see it showing up here. So the next thing we need to do here is we need to add a border radius. You can see now how sharp this battery is. This is not how a typical battery looks like. So you can go ahead and add a background color. No, a border radius. So border radius. So here you can give arbitrary values, but I found out that 8 pixels works best. You can see now the battery looks nice. So the next thing is to add this top stuff that is always shown in the batteries. It's like the terminal of the battery. So you're going to create this one using HTML and CSS. So mostly we just use the CSS to style this. Something else we could do, we could add a border around the battery so that right now it looks weird. So you can add a border of maybe 1 pixel solid, and then let's start with gray. So I think gray looks nice. We can go with that. If need be, we can start to make sure it's not shouting too much. So I want it to be gray somewhere. Yeah, I think that one is, let's stick to gray. I think gray was nice. So we have gray, and then the next thing we need to do is to add that thing that looks like a nipple. So how we can do that is that, so how we are going to do this is that in CSS, we do have a concept called pseudo selector. So every element in CSS has two elements that are called pseudo selectors. So the first one is the after and the before. So this one are used to maybe style. Yes, we have an element, but maybe you wanted to attach something on the element. So you are given two pseudo selectors whereby you're given the after and the before. So these are basically like empty elements around actual element. So like for the before, it could be attached before the battery, and then for the after, it's attached after the battery. But these are given out by CSS to prevent you from creating basically empty elements. So let's see how we can use them and maybe create that structure. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to select the battery, and then we are going to start with the after. So I say these are like new elements that are attached in every element, which are called pseudo elements. And then you can style these pseudo elements. They are already there inside the element itself. So we are going to style the after pseudo element, and then the content, we don't need to give it a content. This one will be an empty content because you're going to style it using CSS. Something else you might need, because this element needs to be positioned, we want to position it absolute of the parent. So we are going to give the parent a position of relative, and then the after, we're going to give it the position of absolute. All right. And then this one will have a top of 0. This one will have a top of 0%. Notice that you can do 0 if 0 is 0. And then we can have a left of 50%. We did about CSS position. So if you did not check that video, you can go check it out. Then you can give it a background color of white. And then you can give it some widths and height so that it can be seen. So you can give it width of 10 pixels and height of 10 pixels. As I said, this is just an element. We could just create an element here, but CSS this is like us creating. We can create a div here and call it. We cannot call it anything. Let's call it class of pseudo after. I'm going to show you. So this one is basically an empty element, and instead of creating an element like this and going and styling it using CSS gives us such elements by default. Because let me just show you. So instead of calling it the after, we are going to just create elements, and then I can show you how the pseudo elements work, because I know. So this is the same thing. So we are going to give it a height of, let's do red so that we can see it. All right, you can see it. And then we had a way whereby we could place this one into the center by translating it, by moving it backwards in the x-axis by its width. So we're going to do a transform here, and then translate, and then you're going to just translate. Okay, so you're going to translate in the x-axis, you're going to push it backwards by its width, and then you're going to push it outside by its height. So you can do like this, 50%. And then you can see where that thing shows up. So instead of doing this, instead of styling an element like this, CSS already gives us such elements. It gives us an after and the before and a before. So for before, it could be something like that. But instead, because this is a very common pattern that is used every day, in CSS, we are given these elements by default, whereby these elements are attached to the parent, and then you can access them. So it's basically the same thing. And then you need to give it a border radius of 50%. So border radius, give it a border radius of 50%, and it becomes round. And then you need to push it backwards using the Z index. So the Z index is used for stacking elements. So you can give it a Z index of -1 because by default it's 1. And then it can sit behind this box like. And then finally, we need to give it a color of white. And then you can see it, and then we can give it a border exactly as the border that is on the parent. So then that's it for the structure. So let's move on So let's move on to our keyframes and then our animations. So let's focus on the animations next. So this is what I want us to do. Because we have already used up the after, we want to overlay yet another item. So we can use the other one, which is called the before, or we can create it in the DOM. But right now, let's create it. Let's use the before. And then we can do the same thing whereby we give it a content, an empty content, and then position of absolute. And then we can give it a width of 100%. So you see why I'm doing this is because the next one that I'm creating, I want it to fill, to overlay this whole battery. So let me first give it a background color. Let me give it a background color of red, and then the height. Let's start with the height of 100%. You can see what happens, and then we can give it the border radius exactly as the parent so that you don't have weird shapes. So, and then now it overlays the parent like this. So we can change the height to maybe 80%. 80%. And then you can see it starts from the top, but we want it to start from the bottom. So that's why we can give it a bottom of 0. So that you can start from the, so you can start to see this shape. So if I change this shape to 50%, you can see now it is changing. If we do 70%, you can see it's moving. So the way we are going to add this battery like animation is because we are going to change these elements height and then changing its background color. All right. So when we change that, then it will we change that and animated it. We animate it and then it will look like the battery is charging. So how we are going to do that is in CSS we have a way to add keyframes. And the syntax for adding a keyframe is as follows. You write keyframes and then you give the keyframe a name. The keyframes a name. You're going to call it charging. You can give it any name. And then you start the frames. Now the frames are like the steps or the sequence. So you can start from 0%, 10%, 20%, 30%, 400. Like you're specifying how the animation will occur. So let's start. So you're going to start at 0%. The height will be 0. So you're starting at height 0. And then we continue adding the keyframes as it should be. And then we go to 20. We want to divide this into 4 parts. So you're going to 25%. And then we add a height of 25%. And then we now change the background color to red. We add the background color to red. And then let's copy this down for the 50% sequence. So 50% in 50%, the height is still 50%. And then we change the background color right now. The 50% is like warning, so we can do the yellow. And then let's copy this down yet again, and then can do 75%, and then this one will be 75. And then on 75, we can do something like pale green because right now it's almost full. And then finally, we do the 100%. Then the 100%, we go to 100%. Then right now it's full, and then we do green. So we have defined the keyframes. The keyframes basically specify the sequences. So where do you start, where do you move, and where do you go? So the way we add this animation to the element you want to animate is that you come here and specify an animation name. We will start with the name, and then you give it the name that is present here. So we are going to start with the animation name. And then we have something else, animation duration. So the animation duration, you are going to do something like 4 seconds. And then there's something else called the animation timing function. So this is the, so the timing function specifies how the animation will occur. You're going to stick with the linear. And then now you can see the animation working as expected. So something else we might want to do is that you can see the animation ran once. So we can specify animation iteration count, and then we can say we want it to be infinite, or you can give it, you can write a number here like 2 so that it can animate twice. And then that's how you add this animation in CSS. So to iterate on this, so the timing function specifies how does it move from one state to another. So for the linear, it goes linearly, easing. We have others, like we have something called cubic Bezier. You can see it is changing the how it is moving from one state to another. And then the final one we can check out is, there are so many. We can see something like ease out. Ease out eases as it moves to the next. So we can see ease. So, but you're going to stick with the linear. So make sure you follow for more tips.